I'm excited about this panel because we're going to be talking a lot about ethics and how to, I would call it how to do good. We're doing a lot of technology. We're going to talk about AI. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship. But how do we make sure that people use this for good? And that's the panel that we have to do. We have Irene. We have Laura. We also have Robert to talk about it. So I wanna start with the first question, and I want to start with the women in the panel. So Laura, let's start about the benefits of AI. In Softbank, you guys are investing a lot. So let's talk a little bit about AI and Latin America. What are the benefits on AI and the impact in the region that you can tell?
Thank you, Christian, and super excited to have the BitLab Forum in Miami. It's incredible to be here with you today. So for us at SoftBank, AI is a critical, let's say, tool and technology that we think should be part of every company. And now, it doesn't matter the size, it should be something that everybody's thinking about, from data science to being able to use AI. We see it as an inclusion force in Latin America. So the things that we see that it's do for good is we see it applied, let's say, in research and development, in the healthcare space. We see companies like HiLife in Brazil being able to process diagnosis of COVID tests faster just because of the use of AI. We see it in some of our portfolio companies who are using it to make better decisions in terms of giving credit. We see it in a lot of our logistics companies that are using it to make more efficient routes that at the end of the day are not only better for them in terms of having more impact in their revenues just because it's become more efficient, but it also has a huge impact in climate, right? So you have less carbon emissions because you're being much more productive on how you're coordinating your logistics. So overall, the cool thing about AI is that it really transforms absolutely every industry. And in Latin America, it's even more important because you're able to offer products and services in a more inclusive way. So for us, one of the things that we make sure is that every company is thinking about AI. It might not be from the very beginning that they're putting it together, but in general, that we want to make sure that the companies that they're building have data in their core and data science as a form of leverage and moat in the future.
Excellent. Irene, I have a question for you, especially since you lead BitLab. Let's talk about how to align financial and market incentives to include ethical considerations into the critical path of development of startups and the investment decision that you have to do and other VCs have to do in the industry. What can you elaborate over there?
Gracias. So thank you, Christian. So the question in itself is quite a mouthful, right? And
yes.
What we want to do here is to sort of unpack it. But starting with these market trends and this urgent need to address the otherwise unintended consequences that the use of AI can have, because Laura, you spoke about all the benefits, and I think all are convinced that there are huge benefits, and it's transforming every industry. We just heard 20 entrepreneurs pitch their businesses to us. One of them, Arcangel, doing amazing things in terms of health diagnostics. But guess what? I mean, a lot of these companies are facing dilemmas, challenges in terms of how to properly protect data privacy, but even beyond that, right? Ensuring that all the governance, the accountability, the transparency, the explainability of the algorithm is based on a strong foundation. And this is the response to your question, Christian, because this is how fAIr LAC came about. What is fAIr LAC? fAIr LAC, and thanks to partners like Microsoft and several others that were involved with us from the beginning, started to work together to translate what are very high-level frameworks of responsible AI that today exist in companies, in countries, etc., and translate them into practical tools that both governments on the public side, our team on the public side did, and us at IDB Lab with entrepreneurs could develop so that they could introduce them in their business model and ensure that they were really applying best standards, like just like today you have environmental, social, and governance standards, ESG, a kind of vocabulary that we are all relatively familiar with, and most investors today ask for companies to comply with ESG. This is the digital dimension of ESG. This is ESG plus D. This digital dimension that today may not be so easily recognizable, or it's not as standardized, but tomorrow, I bet you, Softbank and every other investor is going to require companies to uphold these standards. So this is how it came about, and later I'm sure we can unpack, and together with Robert, a little bit what it is and how it works.
And maybe just to complement Irene, one of the things that we've partnered with the IDB, right, for example, is a lot of our portfolio companies have also, let's say, warehousing facilities with the IDB. And what happens with that is that the digital portion of ESG that Irene is mentioning becomes core on their thinking as well. And it's something that we're encouraging as well, that that has to be part of the conversation on making sure and testing the algorithms to make sure that are unbiased and things along those lines. And it's because they have people that they're doing business like the IDB that has it as a core priority that a lot of our portfolio companies are starting to have this also in mind. And for us, it's super important because all the companies that we're investing, we want to make sure that AI is part of the solution on how they're using these tools to make better products and services.
I wanted to include Robert in the conversation, and there's always going to be trade-offs, especially with this. If we're going to have ethical dilemmas when we're building technology, how do you think we should approach them? Like whenever you have to do this trade-off as a founder or if you're doing an investment.
Thank you, Christian. Well, thank you. First, thanks to IDV for this opportunity, for this forum. Let me start with a caveat and a personal reflection.
Please.
The caveat is that I'm an attorney, so for some people that's a good thing, for some others like, well, and the reason why I'm saying that is I think I was invited here because we've been working for many years, and IDV has given us the opportunity to talk about certain policy issues and to talk about certain principles that I think really matters and how we can really help them implement and educate and socialize them. And certainly AI plus the ethical side plus the responsible AI is what is our work and what we're trying to do. And then a personal reflection, I moved to Miami 17 years ago. There's a lot here about why Miami has this vibe. And when I moved 17 years ago, I remember all my friends saying, I mean, are you crazy? What you're gonna do? Why you would like to live in a place where you go on vacation? And I think that now the story is very different. And after the pandemic, you can see that Miami captured that vibe, captured the talent, captured the entrepreneurship. But more than anything, and I think that someone was saying in the panel before, it has a certain spirit that for those of us that moved many years ago, today we really call it home. And I think there are very few places that you really can call home where you're an immigrant and you come from somewhere else, in my case, Chile. Now, answering your question, I think that there is always a tension with things that you don't know or with new technologies and how, like this technology evolves and how fast it evolves. And certainly AI, it's not the exception. And we all see that it has evolved and has developed in at very fast speed. So now the question is that what should we do? And I think that the answers are a little bit different. At the beginning was a little bit, let's understand the phenomenon and let's work on very strong principles. And then you as a company, in my case, I'm the Director of Law and Government Affairs for Latin America, is how you can really have this principle being understood and this principle being adopted. We very, very fast as well, we realized that principles was not enough. And I think that the question is not what technology can do, is what technology should do. And having these forums that, like fAIr, that provides this opportunity to talk about this, it's one step in the right direction. But I also think that having good, wise, and appropriate regulation is the second needed step in terms of having, like these dialogues with the civil society, with the governments, with the international organizations, with lenders, with venture capitalists, with startups, about what that regulation should look like. It really will help, because in that way we can be sure that first, following what Laura said, you can democratize, you can have it really I mean, technology as a tool for democratization, meaning everybody will access to the same kind of technology and applying the same kind of technology. But also that will help, I think, business to adapt to certain sort of principles that will guarantee that the market is fair, that the policies are fair, and that the access to that technology is fair. And if that happens, which I think it's already happening around the world, especially in Latin America, I think we will have a better starting point for companies that are really, really looking for technology to make a difference.
Maybe
Go,
just like
please.
comment, Christian,
Please.
on is something really important Robert mentioned, which is regulation and the impact we're trying to make through fAIr LAC, which is really a community of people from different segments of society and the industry. Companies like Microsoft, but also from the public sector, academia, as investors and the entrepreneurs themselves, is not to wait for the regulation, but actually to self-regulate and to be open to have a group of experts. We have a pool of experts that is available to, for example, if you are an entrepreneur deploying a solution in telemedicine, doing diagnostics using data of patients, that you can have a pool of experts help you self-diagnose whether you are correctly identifying risks related to data handling, both protection and privacy, whether you, what is the impact of your algorithm in terms of bias, error, or potentially discrimination, unintended or discrimination, and at the end of the day, improve the quality of your business model. And for investors, and here I put my hat also as IDB Lab and also for our colleagues in IDB Invest when these companies grow, improving the quality of our investments. And we're hoping that a lot of the investors here and the VC funds from across the region who are gathering in parallel to the IDB Lab Forum today and tomorrow, that we come out of IDB Lab Forum with a much better awareness of these tools. They are world-class tools, they are dynamic, they're going to be online, they can be embedded in each of the companies and the investment processes of each of us as investors, and that we really leave with a commitment to adopt these practices and to adopt these very practical tools and be ahead of the regulation. And then, yes, the regulation will come.
I really like how we're framing this from, first, I love the new approach and getting this association coming together. I wanted to ask a little bit about marketing incentives. As an entrepreneur, I care about this. I also care about growing, surviving, thriving the business. So what marketing incentives can we implement ourselves in all our stages, in our companies, in the funds, to make this ethics into their products? What would you suggest? And I open the mic to everyone who wants to chip in here.
I think the most important part is that including those incentives, basically including the making sure that there's no bias, that there's no anything wrong on the way you're using these models to deploy, it's not limiting as a company. It's actually even more inclusive. It's just a better way of doing things. So I don't think there's any negative incentive of why a company should not be thinking from day one in terms of ethics and in all sorts of the AI, let's say, flow to be considered from the beginning. And I think this is part of what we try to bring and say in some of the education initiatives that we've done through Softbank with partnership with the IDB Lab, was not only teach people about data science and AI, but also bring into the equation, and in this case, fAIr LAC came as a speaker a bunch of times, to make sure that they understood that all of the algorithms that they're working on and that they're putting together, you should all be thinking about this from the beginning. And it's not only the company, but it's also from a personal perspective. And we just need to make sure that from an education perspective, people are aware that it's something that you need to include within the algorithm. And it's okay, and it's not only AI, it's with everything that we do, right? From hiring, we're making sure that there's no bias when you hire. Same thing needs to happen when you deploy these experiments in terms of algorithms of AI.
Robert.
I think you want to invest in a company that it's not only successful, but I think that really reflect your mission as an investor and really does some good. So for me, having standards, having, like having the right technology for companies to help be in compliance with ethical standards will become, maybe it is today, a differentiator where companies will like to put their money on. I will imagine that if you go and you invest in a startup that is using a technology that agrees to be bound by certain principles, like what, or certain tools, what Irene was saying, that is a company that has gone one step forward to be sure that your money is going to be wisely invested, not only in be really productive, but also in the right use of technology. So how I see is that companies like Microsoft and some other companies, I mean, we're very proud to be a founder member of IDB Lab. If they help to provide those, and maybe the right word is compliance, but compliance has many definitions, but those compliance tools that might certify that, like certain technologies used in certain ways, that should be a differentiator. It's a little bit when you go to the supermarket, and it's something's very big here, and you go and if you invest 10 additional seconds to buy your tuna, which says renewable sources, I feel better. I feel better that I'm eating a product that, it's not killing the oceans. And you have that option. And sometimes you're even willing to pay more for that product because you're not destroying the oceans. And I will say that at least what we're seeing in conversations that we're having is that there is a set of investors, there's a set of companies that really are taking a close look to that. And there are now the solutions, and we hope they're going to be even more massive, that will help those companies to become to get the attention of this selected group of investors so they can really offer a different product.
Yeah, and I love it, Robert, and I think coming from a company that is helping the entrepreneurs along the way in every aspect, I think it's such a good example. And I think the incentive Christians can be seen through that lens, meaning positive incentives, so this differentiation, so that investors need to walk the talk as well. They don't just look at the standard startup metrics of revenue traction, of customer acquisition rate, of monthly growth rate, etc., but that they incorporate these as also this compliance with these standards and the application of this practical tool into their equation, and they put a premium on those companies that actually are doing this. Of course, it affects some sectors more than others. Sectors where companies are using highly sensitive data more than others, or the way they use it. But we are seeing cases, and we have entrepreneurs that have now gone through this fAIr LAC entrepreneurial journey with us that are from fintech to, but they use, for example, geospatial or geolocation, so that matters, or companies that, of course, are in the education space or health tech and others. The other side is these negative incentives, right? You don't want to be seen as a company that has not prevented or mitigated certain risks that we know can have profound social and economic impacts. Something like, Laura, you referred to, of like excluding people when you are hiring because you are using an AI-powered algorithm to hire people, and you're not seeing or treating everybody fairly. So I think it's both positive incentives and negative incentives. But what we need more than anything is for investors, for corporates, and for the startups themselves to really become very conscious of this need and put it in practice. And that's why we make it really easy to use.
I have a follow-up question here, because you're right. We can take the pledge and we can do the work to really make sure and certify that our companies are doing the right thing. And I believe that here in this forum, we have that goal. But how would you change the mindset if you approach a company or an investor that doesn't have this in their principal agenda? What would you tell them? How would you approach those kind of conversations?
Again, I would look at at really describing the positive and the negative potential and the intended consequences of not doing it. And I think we have a number of examples we all hear about every day of this type of discrimination. But I'm sure.
But I also want to compliment because we're looking at the negative side, right? But a lot of the bias that usually exists is because of the human in the middle, right? So sometimes the human is the one that is discriminated, and sometimes even without realizing. So a lot of the solutions that we're seeing in Latin America also come up, exist because they're trying to eliminate potentially a lot of those biases. So I think in more than a few, a lot of the entrepreneurs have this in the mindset. You have to keep them in check to make sure that whoever programmed it did it correctly and uses all of the tools that Irene mentioned for LAC to make it happen. But a lot of the AI that it's being used as well is to try to eliminate some of the biases that come from having a human in the middle. So I think in general, we need to be very conscious of the potential negative consequences, but there's also some amazing good consequences of putting AI, let's say, in the middle, just to very generally use the term AI, to eliminate those biases that come if we knew exactly who the candidate was, let's say, from the beginning, or who is the person that is trying to get the loan, or things along those lines that hopefully, without having a human in the middle, sometimes it eliminates that discrimination from it.
So building on that, I think that the word AI now, usually when you have this conversation, you would like to have a conversation about the principal use of AI, or the ethical use of AI, or the responsible use of AI. And at the end, it's you should only use technology that you can trust. If you don't trust the technology, don't use it. I mean, if you don't trust a product, don't use it, or if you don't trust a solution, don't use it. I think it's very simple when you build it when you try to change your mindset. And that principle is about, being fair, being transparent, protecting the privacy of the user, protecting the data of the user. AI should be inclusive. It should be transparent. It should be secure. So those are like the principles of AI. But I think it's also important to understand and to really see what are the kind of bridges you don't want to cross, because you will make mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. I mean, the very, very, very first use of AI that Microsoft had was horrible. It was a product called TAI that everybody, I don't know if anybody of you remember about it, but it was a really, really bad experience. And we learned a lot about that. And it lasted, for the hour that it should be lasted, because it was bumped with biased messages and the algorithm was not able to identify and created biases, really racist messages. And we learn about it. But I think the bridges that you should never cross is when you build an algorithm or you use technology that will do some harm physically or emotionally. And that is, I was not long ago, but before the pandemic, that looks like long ago already. I was in the Mexican Senate, and I was invited to have a presentation, and everybody was interested about the killer robots. And that's, like the defense industry, and of course companies that they do provide technology to the defense industry, the standards and the hires and everything so the standards should be much more higher. But of course you don't want to be involved in anything that produces any kind of harm. You don't also want to be involved in anything that violated human rights. And at least in the evolution of the human rights as we understand them, we do believe, and at least that's something that at Microsoft we believe, and you can find in our mission statement, is that privacy is a human right. So you don't want to cross that. And finally, you would like to be very careful when you provide the services and you provide a solution that denied a right to someone. Like, for example, what you were saying, and if you are a lender and you would like to, lend your money, it's not that 85% of, the people benefit with your money will look the same or talk with the same accent or everything like that. So I think those are the areas where you should pay extra additional attention.
I like it. By the way, Irene, I have a question for you, and there's a tool available already where I, as an entrepreneur, can do a self-test. So that's pretty nice. Like, it's nice. How do we actually get this in our own hands? Can you tell us a little bit about how the tool works and how can you participate and what it's the tool going to evaluate? And the more we use the tool, the more valid it's going to be across all the board, VCs, investors, and even people who want to work for a company that really cares about ethics in AI.
Yeah, well, and success of this discussion would be if, of course, Christian, you lead the way in
I will
adopting the tool.
take the test. Like I'll finish this and I'll go and do my test.
Platzi,
I'll do
adopting
it.
the tool.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. There will be a demo, there will be a workshop like hands-on for how to use the tool. Actually, it's really user-friendly. It's really being co-created with entrepreneurs. And so the team that is behind it, Tetsuro Narita, Cesar Rosales, Mara Balestrini, people in the team that together with a lot of our partners have developed these tools are amazing. And they will be having a hands-on workshop for those interested in actually seeing the demo and using it and walking through it. I'll just mention a couple of things about how it was conceptualized. And it's a lot what Robert was mentioned, because we thought about 3 dimensions, solution, system, and society. The solution part is to really ask the question, do you really need AI for this? Because sometimes, well, there is a bit of AI washing, no? Like greenwashing, AI washing, companies that say they use it, but they actually don't, or companies that use it, but they don't really need to do it for the purpose of what they try to do. So really that's the number one. And if you decide, yes, you do need to use it, then anticipate the ethical risk scenarios. And it's really interesting. And it's better done in a group where you can have like real other people sort of like asking the tough questions and being sort of the red team, looking at the potential ethical dilemmas that may come up. And so this is basically an ethical self-assessment that covers the conceptualization and design and also the governance. Then there is the second dimension of system, and this refers to more the tech part, like the handling of the data and algorithms, how to reduce the risk of error, of bias, of discrimination, looking at the whole, Laura, you mentioned the whole AI life cycle, including transparency, accountability, replicability, interoperability, and also the human intervention part, which is so important, when and how. Not in every case you may need to disintermediate the human. Actually, in some cases you may need it, but just making really conscious decision in that sense. And the final dimension is society. It's what are the implications beyond what you're seeing. You may think like, you know, your client base is this, or you are going to reach this type of patients, but in the end, it's pulling the wrong data and not understanding the conditions of patients that, for example, didn't have a digital medical history in the system, and so it's not providing the right diagnosis results. So thinking really in terms of who are the stakeholders and who are the different groups that could be negatively impacted if not used well. Does it? Is this how you think about it, Robert?
It completely resonates to me. Maybe, and we haven't discussed this before, so I hope it doesn't come as a surprise when you were, explaining all of this. Maybe the only one additional fact that I would like to add is readiness. I think that, for example, if you would like to become a US Marine, you will take a course of ethics in the process. And you can be 21 years old and you will take it. If you want to go computer, AI, and science, ethics is not usually regular included in the curriculum. So it's changing, but I will say that maybe that is the one additional factor, is how we get, ready and how we really incorporate this discussion, this conversation in the different kind of curriculums, and not only here, but around the continent, Latin America. So maybe the IDB has a big role to play as well about that, and create the courses. And we see a lot here about skilling and about, how, and Christian, you are an expert in skilling and in online courses. So maybe it's a conversation we should have about how we create the module and we incorporate that. So it's easy for companies to say, listen, in the same self-tool that the IDB has, we use your online courses, and then, it's a good way to say that people really invest the time, certified, and for companies to provide that kind of certification.
Are you sure you're a lawyer? You sound like an entrepreneur.
I was actually remembering a story back in the day when I was in school. I had a teacher who taught me ethics, and he said, this will be useful for you because we don't really teach this massively. and I really liked the class. It was a couple of courses. They were not mandatory. I just happened to jump into them because I went into philosophy. I took some ethics, and now remembering, it's hard to bring that access, but in Platzi, we usually teach people a lot of extra curriculum that it's not exactly what they expect. For example, you want to be a developer, it's like, perfect, teach me code, teach me how to be smart, how to talk to computers. And I always say, I also need to teach you English. I also need to teach you some soft skills. I feel like ethics come into here. And as follow-up, I wanted to ask, what kind of projects do you already know that are doing this, more than taking the pledge or more than doing the exercise, that have this conversation? When you interview companies, I don't know if you can mention any companies or if you want to, but what kind of industries are the ones where this happens as a conversation? Laura and Irene, you probably have some examples, and Robert, you can add too.
So I know that our companies are definitely thinking about this 100%, and it's part of what they do. And the amazing thing about Latin American entrepreneurs more than anyone is that they're not only thinking about disruption, but they're thinking about inclusion and how to do things correctly and do good, right? So I see a lot of this happening in the core of our conversations. So I can't give specific examples, but for sure, it's a lot of the companies that are using data science and AI have this top of mind. A lot of it also is because of the conversations that they're having with the IDB as well, which is what makes it top of mind. And it's not only ethics and AI, but it's also the ESG in general and making sure that that's part of what they're doing. And it doesn't have to be because they will get better terms and funding or anything like that. It's just because it's something that you should do no matter what, right? So I think that's really relevant, and we see it across a lot of our companies. The other invitation basically that Irene just mentioned in terms of making a hands-on demo for certain, like I really want us to do this for all of our Softbank Latam portfolio companies. Would be great to do a hands-on demo for them to know and see how more and more they can use it. And everybody's open and willing to take all of these things into account. And I think it's more on how do we make sure that it's being implemented and checked and done correctly. And the collaboration aspect that Irene mentioned on how fAIr LAC operates, which is government, private sector, entrepreneurs, all of them coming together, we believe is the only way to approach this topic. It has to be a combination of different parts and stakeholders coming together and coming up with the best way to self-regulate and potentially help the adoption of different regulation per country.
Any examples, Irene and Robert, that you want to add?
Yes, I was going to mention, maybe 3 sectors where this definitely is happening. In the financial sector, partly because, of course, such a huge portion of innovation and technology has been adopted in this sector, and maybe more driven by the potential negative incentives because of being, accused of, lending practices discrimination or something like that. But I think there is it is happening in the fintech industry. The other 2, health and education. In health for sure, and Portal Telemedicina is a great example of a company that again they produce diagnostics based on data for doctors in many doctors in Brazil, and so it is. And they walked the journey with us, and even before adopting the tool, they thought they were already like sort of best in class. And I think they this third pair of eyes allowed them to see also how they could continuously strengthen the transparency and the accountability to ensure that they did it even better, and that they could manage well the dilemmas sometimes, between data privacy and how much you communicate about or how much you explain about how the algorithm is working. And so there are even very subtle dilemmas in there. So they are way advanced, I think, in health and in biotech and in that sector. And in edutech, I think there is a huge opportunity because we are seeing the unbundling of education and all these hybrid models and we saw a couple today, Arukai, and we saw also companies that are using data from students, and that's also an opportunity. Francisco from Impulsa said that Colombia is starting its edutech association, just like you have the fintech association, so maybe they could be a great partner to do this with.
I think that makes a lot of sense, all those examples. At the end, the algorithm will work, I mean, better if it has more data to manage. So in any single, wherever you have sort of like an open data kind of agreement access, or an NGO, or you know, or a government, and they would like to put this data to the service of certain kind of industries, I think it will work well. And that will be my only additional point to add.
No, I love it. I love it. Any closing remarks that you have? Well, we all have to try this tool. Even if you're running a company or if you're working for a company, like do the exercise. I'm going to be waiting for that workshop. When is it happening? Like, just to make sure that people know? Nope. You know? Friday. Thursday. Okay, so Thursday at what time? We all will figure that out. I'm glad to have this conversation, and most importantly, see how all the different actors are into play. And it brought me into my teacher who taught me ethics. And trust me, we need to do this push, and we need to have this conversation when we're out evaluating companies. I want to see that slide on the deck. It's like, I use AI, and this is how I do it right. And this is what the test got. I don't know if it has a score or everything. We have a lot of questions, but I'm really happy about that. So thanks, Irene, Robert, Laura. Great conversation, and I'm pretty sure that we are going to have to continue talking about this in the following up months for a good follow-up. Thanks for the time.
You.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.